Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Photogtalk. I'm your host, Eric Trevino, and last episode we spoke about briefly of William Klien. We mentioned him briefly in kind of like a list of photographers I was talking about when I spoke of street photography. I spoke of Robert Frank, Bruce Gilden, and for a split second I mentioned William Klien. Now, at the end of that video, if you haven't watched it yet, please go back, please watch it or listen to it, whatever you so please. And I promised that we would talk about William Klien in the following episode, and today, this is that episode. This is going to be a very interesting episode. I'm testing something new. I'm testing out a new program for audio, trying to make it sound clearer as opposed to just relying solely on the mic to do the work. We're going to do a bit of editing, and we're going to hope that it all ends up well. But without further ado, we're going to talk about William Klien. Before we step in, I'm going to explain how this is going to work. First, we're going to just talk about this man's history, his early life from when he was a wee little lad at the age of 14 years old is the earliest to actually have him here on my notes, up until his death around his late 90s. Now, we're going to kind of document his early life up until his late life, and then we're going to kind of give I wouldn't say criticism, because you can't criticize this man. I mean, he's a master at what he does. But we're just going to go over some of his work and what it means to me personally as a photographer, and what it honestly should mean to you if you're a photographer starting off as a photographer. I mean, this guy's work is absolutely superb. This is something that I could only wish I could accomplish in my life. But let's get into it. So, born in 1928 in New York City, Klien can only really be described as one word, and I have him here listed as just creative. And I don't mean creative in the way that he expresses his work artistically, but just kind of the way he carries himself. I mean, as soon as he hits a wall, or as soon as he might think that, oh, this might be the end of William Klien's story, he just keeps going. I mean, he finds a way to keep persevering. I could list him as persevering, but I think just an artistic person in a sense of, well, he is artistic in that he does photography, but an artistic in the way that he finds solutions to these problems or finds solutions to his life. His life is a very, very interesting kind of snowball effect, and you'll see that later. But he came from a poor Jewish family, and he was always scrambling to seek some sort of opportunity. He first sought out this opportunity through the City College of New York, where he graduated at the age of 14 at his high school. So he came into college around the age of 14, 15 years old. I remember I was like barely learning how to drive at 14 and 15. I can't even imagine going to college at that age, let alone at 1945, where things were completely different. Now, Klien was actually initially pursuing an education in sociology, but took a 180 turn and just decided to join the U.S. Army in 1945. During his time of service, he was stationed in Germany. Now, it is unsure if he saw combat. I tried looking. I couldn't really find any sources on that, but it just kind of seemed like he was a soldier just kind of being stationed around Germany and later France, and we'll get into that. But it was here in Germany where he had this massive stroke of luck, where it was said that he won his first camera in a poker game. Imagine winning your first camera as a photographer in a poker game, and then later on becoming, later in life, a extremely important figure in street photography, in fashion photography, in periodicals and editorials. I mean, just the chances of that are slim. But nonetheless, that's how William Klien got his first camera, and that's how he kind of became a photographer. Now, at this time, he wasn't really thinking of photography. As a matter of fact, I don't even think he cared about photography. As a matter of fact, he did care about art, but he didn't care about photography. Because once his services ended, Klien opted to actually stay in Paris, because after his station in Germany, he moved to Paris. He was stationed in Paris, and he just decided to stay there. And with his new GI Bill, Klien pursued education once again, but instead of sociology, he again took a different turn, almost like that 180 going into the army. He took a different turn and studied art with Master Fergan Leger. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that name wrong. Very interesting name, at the Sorbonne, Paris. The name of the school. It is in Paris. William Klien stuck to what he knew and just produced numerous abstracts of both paintings and sculptures over the span of a few years. Again, he was not thinking about photography, like, whatsoever. This is like a person going in. This is like the modern equivalent of man going into videography and then just coming out the end and being like, I guess I'll become a photographer. Just completely different. But this is kind of when Klien's life really begins to shape into what we know him for today. As in 1952, this is kind of a time skip where he was just doing paintings and sculptures. But in 1952, he was commissioned by architect Angelo Menengrotti to recreate his abstract paintings. This was Klien's first real taste in photography, as he captured these paintings panels in motion. Now, I believe maybe at the time, William Klien didn't really think too much of this. It was just a commission, a way to make money, especially as a artist and in Paris, nonetheless. But his creativity and just his, pure artistic value caught the attention of many people. And with this new creativity, he kind of made his way back to New York City. He kind of became inspired. And he went to New York City to just photograph the city he grew up in, just street photography. He went from painting and sculpting to just saying, hey, I'm going to be a street photographer now. I'm going back to New York and kind of pursuing this dream that I learned that I really liked. And after a few short years, Klien's work began to take notice. And for example, the art director of American Vogue actually took an interest to Klien's work. So much so that Klien would end up working for Vogue magazine from 1955 to 1965. So around 10 years, William Klien worked for Vogue, all because he just kind of figured out that, hey, I like photography. I'm just going to do it now. I'm going to go from painting and sculpting to taking photos in my hometown. And it was kind of like the rawness of it, the interesting compositions where people looked at his photography and they're like, hey, this guy's got something going for him. But I don't really want to underplay his work as just like, he went from 1955 to 1965, because for nearly 10 years of Klien's work, again and again, he would wow those at the top of Vogue. His most significant works were a series of experimental light paintings that were as technical as much as they were beautiful. Klien, for example, would set his subject to be photographed in like a witty pose. They would be like pointing at the wall, or they would be looking ahead and their hands are on their hips. They're kind of striking a very, very interesting pose. And he would take their picture and then use a double exposure to kind of paint with light around the model, or just on the model, on the next to the model, just kind of on the picture itself. And for example, in one of his paintings, he does like 2 + 2 = 4. He just kind of writes that down next to the model, and it becomes an extremely popular picture. His most popular picture of that photo shoot was where he kind of draws like this ray of light behind the model, almost like you'd see in a comic book, like a dashed line, like if someone was going to be driving very fast and you had these dashed lines. That's what he did. And it was an instant hit at Vogue. It was an instant hit with people around the time, so much so that people started kind of emulating what he was doing. They were trying to emulate his style and his creativity. And at that time, Klien was just kind of like, he was just kind of playing by ear. He had no really clue. He had no clue what he was doing. He just wanted to do something interesting. And he was kind of altering these photos long before Photoshop was a thing, and it seemed to help him out. Later on in life, Klien actually would talk about this photo shoot, and he stated that I wasn't part of any movement. I was working alone, following my instinct. I had no real respect for good technique because I didn't know what it was. You see, this man didn't even know what good technique was. He just kind of played by ear. He just wanted to have fun with what he was doing. If he found a subject interesting to shoot, if he found an idea that was worth shooting, then the man would just go out and shoot it. He wouldn't care. He didn't have no respect for the rules because he didn't know what the rules are. He just knew what he wanted to do. His own rule set. And that's what I think what made him so unique. He was just kind of a fun person to shoot with. I don't personally know that, but in the photos, you can tell that a lot of the models seem to be kind of doing something new. They're all posing in weird ways. They're all wearing something interesting. They're all doing something that isn't kind of like the baseline for a lot of models at the time. There's a photo of his of two women walking down a crosswalk, and this was in Paris, France, and they're wearing just a simple dress, and he's using a telephoto lens, which was kind of unheard of at the time for modeling, and he would be taking photos of them from far away, and it got to the point where a lot of these models were starting to be harassed because all they were doing was walking up and down this crosswalk. People thought they were hookers, so they would start, grabbing their butt. They would start whistling at them. So Klien would have to go down there and sort business out and make sure they were safe. But this kind of style of modeling photography became so famous that a lot of people started switching to telephoto lenses in the 1960s to emulate what Klien was doing, as a lot of these photos in Vogue, if they were in black and white or in color, had that telephoto lens of kind of like I don't want to say stalker, that's a little weird, but kind of like a person from far away shooting a photo of someone extremely far away, almost like a candid photo. But it made it look so natural, and those photos are extremely beautiful. Please search them up if you have the time. But another photo that he would do is called Smoking and Veil. Now, for today's standards, this photo is kind of tame. I've seen worse on a normal person's Instagram feed, but this photo is just a woman smoking a cigarette under her black veil. Okay, that's not bad. It's just a woman smoking a cigarette. What's the big deal, right? Well, Klien actually made this woman smoke the cigarette with her fingers alone. Usually at the time, they would have those, kind of like these long pipes, and they would put the cigarette at the end of it. So they would never hold the cigarette directly. Now, when Klien did this, a lot of people kind of assumed, hey, you're making these women smoke like sailors. You're making them look ugly, disgusting. This is not how a woman should be smoking. It's ridiculous. People hated this photo when it came out. And, look back at it now, you see women smoking on the street like that. It's not really a big deal. But this kind of destroyed barriers at the time being, especially for Vogue, where they wanted women to be perceived as almost like princesses, that they had to be pure and smile all the time. They had to be witty. So having a woman in a black veil kind of look very serious. If you see the photo, she looks very serious, kind of looking to her right, smoking this cigarette, kind of looking like she doesn't give a shit, probably because she didn't. But again, this photo was considered brash and unconventional, as classy women never smoked with their fingers. If you're a woman and you're classy and you are smoking with your fingers, well, you got to reconsider if you actually are classy or not. I don't think you are, because according to the critics back in 1965, you were brash and ugly and nasty. Well, so don't smoke cigarettes. Those are bad for you. But outside of Vogue, Klien continued to photograph the streets of New York and other major cities across the world. Now, I explained previously in my other episode about the ethics of street photography, but I also mentioned photography books. A lot of people who do street photography always make a book. Always do. And William Klien was no different. Just like Robert Frank, he kind of took photos of just the city life and the people who lived in these cities. And he started with New York City, a city, like I said, he was native to, that he knew all too well. He went through a lot of different boroughs: Bronx, Manhattan, Harlem. He just took photos wherever he wanted to take photos at. And some of his best work was actually present within this book. If you've ever seen a photo of a kid kind of flashing a gun at someone's camera, he's kind of got like this mean mugging face to him. That was a photo by William Klien, and that was a photo that was present within this book. Extremely popular photo. And if you are a fan of William Klien, then you would know that on the contact sheets, those kids are just having fun. Like, it's that photo, and that kid is looking extremely serious, pointing the gun at the camera, like, looking mad, like he's about to shoot William Klien. But then in the other photos, they're all smiling and laughing. They're just kind of playing it around. And in a documentary, William Klien actually literally just asked the kids, hey, look, put your mean face on, point the gun at me, be mean to me. And I think the kids found that funny. Now, other than New York, William Klien would actually travel to other cities. Now, these cities included Tokyo, Moscow, and Rome. I want to kind of take a note here and say that it was weird that he didn't take photos in Paris, as that was a city he spent a majority of his young life in after his time in the military. So it's kind of weird he included Rome for the city in Europe as opposed to Paris. William Klien probably knows the answer to that, or he knew the answer to that. But maybe he just felt more inspired in Rome. Who knows? But that first book that I was talking about is called, if you're looking for it, is called Life is Good and Good for You in New York. That book actually won the Prix Mandarin in 1956 for the showcase of the raw city life in New York, held within the boroughs of Harlem, the Bronx, Manhattan, all of that. Now, those books are quite hard to come by. I recommend you just look them up online, especially the Tokyo book. That is another one of his books that are become uberly famous. I mean, extremely, extremely famous. So much so that I believe is one of the only books who's had a reprint. They had a reprint back in 2014, and it's simply just labeled Tokyo. And it's also extremely hard to come by, even though it's a reprint. I believe they should just have this on public domain at this point, or at least available online. But who knows? If you for whatever reason come into contact with this book, pick it up. Not even buy the thing. You'd be rich. Now, his books on Rome and on Moscow are kind of a little less popular. In Moscow, he has a few famous photos, but nothing interesting. Or not necessarily nothing interesting, but nothing of note like the ones in Tokyo or in New York City. And in Rome, me personally, I haven't even seen that book. I haven't looked through it. There are probably photos that are popular on there, and I just didn't know came from that book. So I'll need to take a look on that. I can't speak upon that book. And William Klien would just kind of continue to just take photos on the street. He loved doing this for his career. Vogue was giving him paychecks for 10 years, but after a while, he kind of became disillusioned with the magazine, and he decided to go his separate ways. He was already doing the books, and he just decided to continue on with street photography. He became so disillusioned with Vogue, in fact, that in the 60s, he produced a film called Who Are You, Polly Magoo? This was like a huge slap in the face to those working in the fashion industry at the time. It was basically making fun of the president of Vogue, saying that like she's ridiculous, she dresses weird, she acts weird. Who Are You, Polly Magoo is kind of like a big FU to that industry. An industry that, quite frankly, he did not care much about. In an interview, he stated that he didn't give a shit about modeling photography. He just cared about photography in general. He just thought that, hey, this is just a good excuse to take decent photos. I'm just going to take it, and hell, they pay me pretty well, so I'm just going to continue with it. It wasn't until later that he realized that, shit, I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and make street photography, and make a profit off that. Now, with that film being made of Polly Magoo, he decided to make other short films, films like I believe, I forgot the name of, but a film based in New York that just kind of shows the lights and the people in New York City, especially near Broadway. It wasn't as popular as this next film that I mentioned, and that was a Muhammad Ali film, where that is where you get the I float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Like, that's where you get that quote from. It's an extremely, extremely important book, or important film. If you haven't seen it, it is on YouTube, completely free. Just search up William Klien, Muhammad Ali, and you'll find that link extremely fast. The way he actually was able to get this short film with Muhammad Ali was very interesting. He was on a plane ride, and he sat next to Malcolm X. He kind of looked to his shoulder. He looked up to his shoulder, and he was like, "Oh, well, that's Malcolm X." Him and Malcolm X spoke about photography, as Malcolm X was also a vivid photographer, and they just, they shot the shit about photography, and sooner or later, Malcolm X introduced him to Muhammad Ali. William Klien was just so entranced by Muhammad Ali. If you're not a big boxing fan, Muhammad Ali is probably one of the greatest heavyweight boxers of all time. Definitely one of the most egotistical, and I'm saying that in a good way. I'm not saying that egotistical. Oh, this guy talks a lot of shit. He talks a lot of shit, but he backs it up. He's a great, great boxer. Sadly, he has passed, but that film kind of showed more personality for Muhammad Ali, and it was all produced by William Klien. Now, William Klien would not only just do these films, but he would also write a book, and soon after just continue with photography. And he did that up until his death only a year ago. He passed away in 2022. He was, I believe, 96 years old. Let's see. Now, don't quote me on that. Yeah, he was 96 years old is when William Klien died. And he died in Paris, France, the city that had given him so much, the city that had practically kick-started his career, and for whatever reason didn't make a photo book on. I don't know why. But may he rest in peace. He was honestly one of my favorite photographers, if not my favorite photographer. Now, I want to just go and take a moment and talk about William Klien's art just for a brief second. We talked about his bio, we talked about his life, and yeah, we did talk about his work for a bit of a second, but his art is something that I can't even describe. It's just once in a lifetime talent. It's one of those photos where I look at and I think, oh my God, I have so much to learn. I'm nowhere near the point that I want to be at. And I mean, obviously, if you look at the masters of Robert Frank, Vivian Maier, you might feel that type of way. But with William Klien especially, this man has done it all. If you look at his modeling photos for Vogue, you realize what a good portrait is. You don't have to rely on your nifty 55 millimeter lens or your 35 millimeter lens. He proved that with telephotos, with unconventional compositions, that you can make an extremely, extremely great composition. You can make an extremely great piece of work. And I just, man, it's almost like I'm out of words when I speak about this man. He is the president, or the catalyst of what a photographer should be. You should just shoot photography because you want to fucking do it. He took the Vogue job. Yeah, he took it for money, and then he quit because he realized, hey, I just want to just do photography on my own time. And that's just, to me, that's just beautiful. Why bother with what other people are saying? Hey, you can't use a telephoto lens for modeling. Well, yeah, fuck it, I will. You know, hey, you're using lights in an unconventional way to create portraits. Well, yeah, shit, I might. Hey, you're gonna make movies now? You're gonna write books? Yeah, sure, fucking, I'm gonna do what I want. He was the man that just proved to people time and time again that whatever he wanted to do, he can do it. And I don't know why that resonates with me so much. It's kind of like a Theodore Roosevelt of photography. You know, Theodore Roosevelt being a former American president, not like former, but a American president in American history who just kind of did things. You know, he just kind of went on adventures and learned languages and did all these random things just because he felt like fucking doing it. And that's the same with William Klien. He was a trailblazer. And if you're not looking at photography in a way that you're improving yourself and improving your work, not because other people are telling you, but because that you just want to do it, then you're looking at photography the wrong way. Now, William Klien, his work has influenced me, and I know has influenced many other people, but I highly recommend you look at those photo books we were talking about. I know there might not be a physical copy available on eBay or Amazon, but you could sure find numerous photos on the internet or on YouTube. It's just art. It's something that you need to look at. I can't even describe the way those photos look. He's able to keep everything in frame, especially with his street photography. He uses mainly a wide angle lens, almost primarily a wide angle lens when it comes to street photography, which isn't like a very, like a, how do you say it, like a very uninteresting thing. It's kind of a common thing to use a wide angle lens, but the way he does it is that he layers people. Like you'll have a foreground, a background, and a middle ground. And almost all of his photos have that. And what I see now when it comes to street photography is just people focusing on a single subject. No one's focusing on the background or the middle ground. They're just focusing on a person, for example, just like picking up trash on the street or taking a phone call in the middle of the highway or in the middle of a crosswalk. I was about to say in the middle of the highway. That would be a bad idea. But they're just focusing on the very basic of the photo. And hey, I do the same thing. I'm trying to work on it. But I believe what makes William Klien photography so well is that he's able to kind of include this whole context in an image that can be washed out if you just use your camera settings wrong. Say if you're trying to get a whole scene of a bunch of people and you're on like f2.8, you're not going to get that scene right. He is he's closing his shutter, he's closing his aperture, I'm guessing up to like f8, to get just like almost everything in focus. There's not a lot of bokeh, or there's not really a lot of kind of background blur. Everything tends to be in focus. If it's not in focus, it's usually because it's a photo in motion, which I believe is also what makes a photo incredibly interesting when it comes to street photography. If you can show the use of motion in street photography, then you've got yourself set up for something great. Anybody can take a photo of somebody doing something and it just looks like a still image. Those can be great, but having motion in your photos really adds another layer to what you're trying to portray. Now, to end it off, I want to say that William Klien is the best photographer known to man. I'm just going to say it. That is my personal opinion. Obviously, I'm biased. I decided to make a whole video about the man, but I believe he is one of the best street photographers ever. Better than Robert Frank, better than Vivian Meyer, better than Bruce Gilden, better than your favorite YouTuber, better than me, better than anybody. He is just what a street photographer should be. Kind of a hard-nosed, kind of I don't give a shit mentality, but not necessarily being an asshole to people. He's just real. He's a real man, a real photographer. Well, now that concludes our episode of Photogtalk. I really hope you enjoyed today's session. We're going to be working with something new, trying to change the audio up a bit. Please tune in next week when we talk more about photography. And we're actually going to be talking about another photographer, Tatsuo Suzuki, who I want to mention right now as my second favorite photographer. Um, we'll be talking about him in our next episode, as well as recent camera news, and just instead of kind of providing a biography like we did with William Klien, we're just going to kind of look at his work and see how he shoots photos as opposed to other street photographies in Tokyo or other street photographers in the United States. Thank you so much, folks. Have a good rest of your day or good rest of your night whenever you're listening to this. Thank you, and catch you on the next one.